This is DW News live from Berlin. Tonight, massive airstrikes. Russia begins evacuations from a region bordering Ukraine. Authorities have released images that show the aftermath of the attacks in Belgorod. Pro-Ukrainian Russian forces have carried out several raids in that region. Also coming up, America's top diplomat holding talks in Saudi Arabia as part of Washington's latest efforts to secure a ceasefire in Gaza. But Israel insisting it is moving ahead with plans for an invasion of Rafah. And find out which country is all smiles after being named the happiest on the planet for the 7th year in a row. How'd they do that? I'm Brent Kofta. Our viewers watching on PBS in the United States and to all of you around the world, welcome. We begin tonight near the Ukrainian-Russian border with reports of a massive air attack in the Russian region of Belgorod. The governor there saying that 2 people were killed today. Belgorod has increasingly been targeted by shelling with anti-Kremlin Russian fighters believed to be operating in the border zone. Russian authorities now say that they will move forward with plans to evacuate children and that they plan to scale up security there.
This kindergarten in Belgorod is one of many buildings damaged in shelling. The kindergarten principal witnessed the blast firsthand.
It was loud. The glass was ringing. All the doors were shaking. After the last and the loudest bang, we understood that it was somewhere nearby. We didn't even suspect that it was at our place. We thought it was close, but not at our place. Then, when everything calmed down, we saw the aftermath.
No children were injured. But in another part of Belgorod, a man was killed when shrapnel from the shelling hit his car. Russia's military says the attack is aimed at destabilizing the country after its recent election.
Of course, we can respond in the same way, both regarding civilian infrastructure and all the other objects that the enemy attacks. We have our own views on this matter and our own plans. We will follow what we have outlined.
So far, Russia's plans include restricting entry to nearby cities in the Belgorod region and evacuating around 1,200 children. But with the war in Ukraine now on Russia's doorstep, the border region is feeling the effect, and the source of enemy fire is getting harder to detect.
Well, Russia shut down DW's Moscow bureau 2 years ago. Since then, our team has been based in the Latvian capital, Riga. Our correspondent, Aparna Amamurthy, there told me more about the situation in Belgorod.
So Belgorod is feeling the impact of the war firsthand. The situation seems to be very tense there. This is a region which, as you mentioned, is near the Ukrainian border and it is facing near daily attacks. Moscow authorities are blaming these on Kyiv, basically. Belgorod is about 30 kilometers or about 20 miles from the border with Ukraine. It has been a regular target of Ukrainian fire, which has reported to be increased in the past weeks. We have heard from the governor of Belgorod that around 9,000 children will be evacuated from the city. He said these children will be moved from Belgorod farther east away from the Ukrainian border. Now, we don't know any information about adults, what will happen to the adults, but for now, children will be evacuated. And the first group of them could be evacuated as early as on Friday, which is March 22nd. So far, 16 people have been killed and 98 injured just in the past week. This announcement of evacuation comes days after airstrikes forced closures. Students were told not to attend the school from this Monday, and even shopping centers and cultural places have been closed. Russia's defense ministry said its air defense systems shot down 13 missiles so far.
Russian President Putin says that Russia will respond to these attacks, and now Russian strikes are already hitting Ukrainian cities and civilian infrastructure. What more do we know about that?
So compared with the destruction across much of Ukraine, Russia's huge territory has been largely still untouched. Belgorod is the main exception now. This situation has forced President Putin to speak about it. So now, 2 years into the war, President Putin, on his recent victory speech, told that he wants to create a buffer-free zone to help and protect the border regions from cross-border attacks. He promised to restore Russia's safety, safety in Russia's border regions. And on the other hand, Ukraine has increasingly taken the fight behind Russian lines. It is attacking warships, railways and airfields. And it's obviously an attempt to diminish Moscow's military operations. Most recently, it has even attacked on oil infrastructure. So it remains unclear what impact the attacks will have on the fighting, if any. But still, Russia has the advantage on the battlefield and has been pressing along the front line in recent weeks. And we will see that continuing more intensely in the near future. And it seems Russia is ready to increase its attacking army, especially now after President Putin's re-election.
DW's Aparna Ramamurthy joining us tonight from Riga with the latest on the situation there along the border between Ukraine and Russia. Aparna, thank you. Well, today, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz spoke before the parliament, reaffirming his commitment to Ukraine. Now, it comes ahead of a 2-day European Union summit in Brussels, where leaders will discuss support for Ukraine, as well as other topics. Now, the German Chancellor today reiterated that Germany is with Ukraine, saying that time is not on Russia's side.
If the Russian president believes that he just has to set out this war and we will weaken in our support, then he has miscalculated. Russia is not strong. It cannot speculate that we will let up support. We will continue for as long as necessary.
Schulz is not alone there. Here in Europe, most leaders continue to stress their long-term commitment to supporting Ukraine, but increasingly there are rifts over just how far that support should go. Some countries have been calling for higher defense spending. The divisions have been especially public since France's President Emmanuel Macron went out on a limb with an idea that he floated earlier this month.
On the face of things, the French President and the German Chancellor are aligned. Both committed pro-Europeans who also both explicitly support Ukraine. But it started to become clear they might not be getting on, related to how Europe is supporting Ukraine. Macron started talking about sending European ground troops to Ukraine. Scholz said no. Macron suggested Germany should be sending long-range Taurus missiles. Scholz was forced to say no.
Macron has put Scholz in a very difficult position. And in some ways, Scholz shouldn't have shut up, but he should have stuck to a message and it should have been true and consistent. And because he has form for wiggling around all over the place and changing things, it doesn't look very effective once he's responding to Macron.
DW has heard speculation by some senior EU diplomats that Scholz's refusal to send the Taurus missiles to Ukraine is personal on his part, that having been pressured into sending Leopard tanks, he now wants to be seen to stand firm on something. The President and the Chancellor met in Berlin last week and were all smiles and friendship, but no public expression of change in political positions. The reality is that Germany has actually become Ukraine's second biggest supplier of military aid after the US, amounting to 17.7 billion euros. It's significantly more than that of France, which has committed 635 million euros of military aid, according to the Ukraine support tracker.
So the Ukrainians will be asking, well, Macron talks a big game, but is he willing to back that up by a significant increase in military assistance to Ukraine?
France and Germany getting along with each other is fundamental for the European Union. Not much happens unless the two can agree. And Ukraine is just one of the issues EU leaders are discussing during their Brussels summit.
Yeah, no doubt the crisis in the Middle East will also be on the agenda. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today saying that preparations are still underway for the invasion of Rafah in southern Gaza, but he says it will take some time. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he has met with his counterpart in Saudi Arabia today for further talks that are aimed at securing a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. U.S. officials say that he will travel to Israel on Friday. While speaking earlier this week, Blinken said that 100% of Gaza's population, everyone, is now in need of humanitarian assistance. Joost Hilterman is a Middle East and North Africa expert. He's also program director at the International Crisis Group. I asked him what needs to change for a ceasefire and hostage release deal to happen.
Well, in order for a ceasefire to happen, we need what has been lacking all along, which is U.S. pressure on Israel to accept one. Of course, there are differences between Israel and Hamas about what a ceasefire should be. But regardless of those differences, the fact that we're facing the imminent threat of famine in Gaza and where close to 2 million people remain displaced suggests that a ceasefire is urgently needed. And so the United States is the only power that can help bring that about if it were to use the leverage that it has.
What about the leverage? What about the power of Saudi Arabia? What role do the Saudis have to play in shaping an agreement here?
Saudi Arabia, the only role it plays is to beg the United States to put pressure on Israel to come to a ceasefire. Saudi Arabia doesn't have really any significant leverage vis-a-vis Israel at the moment.
I understand that the U.S. Secretary of State is traveling to Cairo next. We know that Egypt is already constructing a walled-in camp in the Sinai Peninsula to receive displaced Palestinians. I mean, can you walk us through what's at stake right now for Egypt's leaders?
Yeah, well, of course, for Egypt, the threat of Palestinians from Gaza spilling into Sinai, into Egypt, therefore, is really great, and they want to avoid such a scenario at any cost. At the same time, if the situation in southern Gaza develops in such a way that Palestinians will, out of this desperation, throw themselves across the fence into Sinai, it would be very difficult for Egypt to refuse them and to reject their entry. So it must make accommodations for some of them anyway. And I think that's what they're doing. It's a plan B or plan C, certainly not what they want.
And while all of this is happening, at the same time, an Israeli delegation is visiting Washington to discuss the planned assault on Rafah. We know the United States opposes that. How might these two competing, if you will, diplomatic efforts influence hopes of a ceasefire deal?
So, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, there's one thing that the U.S. and Israel agree on, and that is the defeat of Hamas. But there's one thing also that they disagree on, and that is how it is done. And that is the key question, because if for Israel defeating Hamas means destroying Gaza and expelling its population or displacing it in such a way that it can have no services and can only starve to death, then that is a red line for the United States. So that is why the United States until now has opposed an invasion of Rafah that does not include provisions for the population that is currently living or displaced there.
Joost Hilterman joining us tonight from Brussels. Mr. Hilterman, we appreciate your time and your analysis tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Let's take a look now at some of the other stories that are making headlines this hour. Ireland's Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, has announced that he is resigning, saying that he's leaving for both personal and political reasons. He also says that he will no longer be party leader. His departure follows the failure of dual constitutional referenda earlier in March that Varadkar and his government had championed. 12 workers have been killed after an explosion at a coal mine in southwestern Pakistan. Officials say that the blast was caused by a buildup of methane gas. Deadly accidents are common in Pakistan's mining industry. In Myanmar, the auction of the home where imprisoned democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi spent years under house arrest has attracted no bidders. The court-ordered sale follows a long legal battle between the Nobel Peace Laureate and her estranged brother. Suu Kyi has been jailed for 27 years on a variety of charges brought by the ruling military junta. Indonesia's Electoral Commission has confirmed Prabowo Subianto as the winner of the presidential election. Now, he's expected to take power in October following a transitional period. His two rivals say that they will file a legal complaint over alleged irregularities during last month's vote. Police have arrested 6 people and raided the home of former Spanish Football Federation President Luis Rubiales. It's all part of an investigation into alleged corruption and money laundering. Now, the former football boss is already facing charges in connection with kissing Spanish player Jenny Hermoso without her consent following Spain's World Cup win last August. Well, for weeks now, farmers in countries across Europe have been protesting against what they say is too much red tape, too much government overreach that threatens their livelihoods. Farmers are also upset about cheaper Ukrainian imports flooding the market. Well, today, farmers again blocked roads in European countries ahead of tomorrow's EU summit, which they hope will address their concerns.
Building fires in the middle of roads. Polish farmers are once again blocking traffic in nationwide protests. They brought their tractors, and even a coffin they say symbolizes the death of agriculture.
Spring is coming. There will be expenses for fertilizers, fuel, and everything else. These things are very expensive. I don't know how long I'll last.
Protesting high costs and low produce prices. It's part of a 3-month action plan by farmers across the EU. Many of them blame their woes on the EU's environmental regulations. They say they add more bureaucracy, leaving farmers with even larger bills.
We're fighting for the abolition of the Green Deal. That's our top priority.
Protests in the Czech Republic, too. Much of the farmers' anger is also directed at cheaper Ukrainian produce making its way into the EU, tax-free and without having to conform to strict EU rules.
The biggest problem are the ridiculous regulations. Importing grain from Ukraine would not be a problem if it were done under the same conditions as we have here and with the same taxes that we pay.
They claim those imports are driving down the prices of their own produce. So far, the European Commission has denied the imports have a, quote, significant impact on prices, while the EU has reached a provisional deal that would continue allowing duty-free Ukrainian products until mid-2025, with new caps on some food imports like oats and corn. Farmers are now waiting for the outcome from Brussels, where EU leaders are set to meet for a 2-day summit.
Well, you've heard of the 7-year itch. In Finland, it's more like the 7-year smile. For the 7th year running, Finland has been named the world's happiest country. Well, that's according to the UN's World Happiness Report that looks at life satisfaction in 143 countries and territories around the world. Denmark, Sweden, and Iceland also continue to top the leaderboard, coming in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. But this year, there's been a significant slide down the rankings for Germany and the United States, mainly due to the gloomy outlook of younger people.
If you're looking for good cheer, you'll likely find it here, in Finland, the world's happiest nation for the 7th year. You'd be forgiven for thinking there must be something in the water. But researchers put it down to Finns' own life satisfaction, as well as social support, health, life expectancy, freedom, generosity, and GDP.
Finnish people most probably are happier because they can rely on a good institution, so meaning a well-functioning government, low level of corruptions, and a robust welfare.
Factors that Finns have a great appreciation for.
Well, I think I have had the opportunities to do what I want. I have a good education. I can raise my child in here quite safely, I think. So that is maybe the most important thing for me right now.
We are for now a welfare state, and that we have quite strong equality here. But this is, of course, something that, for example, our current government is trying to run down. So I think this is something that we would really need to fight to still keep.
Such appreciation may be in shorter supply in the United States and Germany, which aren't among the happiest nations, ranking 23rd and 24th respectively. Germany is also one of the countries in which older people are now happier than those under 30. Afghanistan is at the bottom of the table, amid a humanitarian crisis after the Taliban regained control. But goodwill remains universal. The report found that in our post-COVID world, acts of kindness are on the rise across the generations, giving us all something to smile about.
Well, Mr. Smiley himself, John Helwell, he joins me now. He's one of the founding editors of the World Happiness Report, the first one released back in 2012. He's also responsible for this year's edition. John, it's good to have you on DW. I don't want to get too philosophical here, but I want to start by asking you, is it really possible to measure happiness? I mean, we don't even really know what it is, do we?
Well, Aristotle said to find out whether someone has led a good life or not, you ask them to think about their life as a whole in a reflected moment. And that's exactly the main question that we use. Ask people to think of their life as a whole, or the latter, the best possible life is a 10 and the worst is a 0. How do they rate their lives today? And so it's not about it's about life as a whole.
And what do you do if they say, well, I have different ideas about things that make me happy, or maybe people are not happy or unhappy at the same time?
It's possible. So any survey, you're going to have a couple people who are in a really bad state that week or that month. On average, though, what goes on in your own life is going to average out across the whole population.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the most surprising, I think, most disturbing findings of this year's report is the decline in happiness among young people, particularly in the United States, Canada, Australia, and Germany, people who actually should be in the prime of their lives, their youth, and yet they're sad. Do we know why?
Not yet, but we've looked at the respondents because we know quite a lot else about them from the surveys and from which we get the data. And it isn't because they're poor or more likely to be unemployed or less healthy than the people 12 years ago we're comparing them to. So it has to do more with what they're thinking about life. And we're expecting to find, one of the theories anyway, is that there's actually enough negative news around about their colonial histories, about the treatment of people of different races, different religions, different backgrounds, and it's creating tension in most of the public institutions, from schools to hospitals to universities to firms, and it shows up in the news.
John, do you think that is what's making young people feel so blue? I mean, we're talking about people who are digital natives who tell us that they feel more like digital hermits. Is it not, I guess, connected to the fact that they are on social media all the time and that they have a closer relationship to a gadget than they do to other human beings? Isn't that something that could be making them sad?
Yes. Just to give you a short answer, yes. Certainly part of the story.
And is it what we're seeing also in other places? I'm thinking of Eastern Europe, Africa, South America, Asia. Are young people there also saying they're not so happy?
No, that is one of the things that we're focusing on, because it's just in these rich English-speaking countries that are rethinking their histories. It's got to be something that's specific to them. They are perhaps more device dependent, perhaps more social media dependent, perhaps more involved in confrontational social media and hearing more confrontational news on their news feeds. We find, for example, it is not the case for Quebec, which is mainly francophone within Canada. The drop there for the young people is about half what it is for the rest of Canada.
Well, are there any lessons then that policymakers could draw from these findings?
Well, I think the last thing anybody needs their government to say is everything's fine, go ahead and be happy, because that looks too much like 1984. What the message to individuals is to recognize that their happiness is essentially made at home and in their communities, in their workplaces, by their own decisions as to how to approach those difficulties. And if they change the way in which they face these things, and it may involve taking out the earbuds and putting away the phone more and spending more time with people and fewer with the gadgets.
Yeah, and it's a lot to think about. And I guess young people could also look at us and say, we've got lots of valid reasons for being sad. When you look at the environment, for example, and the fact that it seems inequality is not getting better. I mean, there's lots to talk about there. Unfortunately, though, John, we're out of time. John Helwell, editor of the World Happiness Report. And John, thank you. Leave us smiling. Have a good one.
You bet. Bye.
Archaeologists in Turkey have unearthed evidence that people were wearing body piercings as long as 11,000 years ago. That's right. If you thought you were fashion forward, think again. The dig in the southeast of the country found beads near skeletons that experts now believe were once worn by those buried there. It is the first time that such objects have been found close to the lips and ears of the bodies, leading archaeologists to conclude that they were, in fact, body piercings. That's a lot to think about. Here's a reminder of our top story. Russia has begun evacuations from the Belgorod region bordering Ukraine. Anti-Kremlin Russian forces based in Ukraine have carried out several raids. Russian President Vladimir Putin says that he is stepping up defenses in the area. You're watching DW News. After a short break, I'll be back to take you through the day. Stick around. We'll be right back.